Good morning, Rodney.
How are you, Gary?
Doing great. It was just, coming off the Clemson loss, we were reading Nick Saban had lost his edge. They'd recruited well the year before, but got blown out in the national championship game, turnover in the staff. This was going to be the year that recruiting was going to catch up with them in terms of not being able to duplicate those great classes. Clemson was going to run away. Georgia was ahead of Alabama. Now we sit here on July 1st. And Rodney, this class is not done, but it's right there nipping at the heels of Clemson. And if this thing falls into place the way it could, potentially, with all the great classes Nick Saban's had, this is saying something. But this class has an opportunity potentially to be as good as any of them. Would you agree?
Certainly would agree. I think so, and I think a lot of people actually that have just sit back and really observe this, Gary, are kind of surprised, and I'm not sure why, but a lot of people had kind of counted Alabama out. I think maybe it was the constant turnover in the coaching staff. You mentioned the loss to Clemson, all of those things, and I think people kind of thought, well, Nick Saban's losing his touch. The young Sharks are here. You've got Kirby Smart, you've got Jeremy Pruitt, you've got Jimbo Fisher, all of these young Sharks out there that are kind of taking over the water, so to speak. And guess what? He's still the biggest shark in the sea right now. I'll tell you that. Doing an extremely good job. Now, look, I understand what the ratings are and all of that stuff, but I'm just talking about what they've done as a coaching staff to get Alabama in position to have what appears to be a fantastic recruiting class.
All right, folks, we're going to do 2 segments with Rodney this morning because of the time constraints. So if you want to ask a question on the Bud Light hotline, 205-342-9904, you can call in and visit with Rodney. All right, James, Pat called in earlier this morning, said he was going to be on the road. Let's go ahead and get his questions out of the way. You wrote them down. What did he have for Rodney?
So he asked about, essentially, Rodney, will Alabama get somewhere around 27 total signees for the class? And also some questions as far as maybe because of the 25 scholarship limit, how much attrition there might be as far as when it comes to getting to that 25 and a quarterback signee.
Yeah, all right, let's start with the total number, Rodney. That's a big question. Pat wanted to know if they could sign as many as 27. Do you think some current members of this commitment class will drop? And what's the status of quarterback recruiting for the Crimson Tide? That's all 3 of his.
Well, first of all, I would say that the last I heard was 26. And now, again, I don't know if that would include Landon Dickerson or if he had been number 27. The grad transfer from Florida State. But I would say, listen, we know it's going to be 25, more than likely, if not more. 26 could be the number. So we'll see how that goes. As far as, some of the current commits, we've seen a few already. DeRicky Wright decommitted now has committed to Ole Miss. Dazalin Worsham, the wide receiver from Hewitt-Trussville, decommitted here last week. There probably or possibly will be more. Would not surprise me if a few guys decide to go in another direction. Again, I always say this, very rarely are you going to see Nick Saban or any coach turn down a top-notch talent. So I think though numbers are tight, will be tight, but I still think Alabama will be able to fit in as many big-time players as they can. And the quarterback situation in terms of recruiting right now, there's been some talk about maybe Alabama won't sign one. I would be a little surprised if they did not sign one. I expect them to sign one. And I've kind of felt for a while, Gary, and we've talked about it on your show, certainly talked about it extensively on TiderInsider.com. I've said it. I still believe that Alabama's in a lot better shape with Bryce Young, the 5-star quarterback out of California who's committed to USC, than maybe a lot of people think.
You know what, Rodney? You've been saying it for some time, and you know what? A lot of other people are saying it now. It's picking up momentum. This is the long time commitment to USC and Bryce Young. So you're right. I mean, you've been saying quietly, just hey, keep an eye on Bryce Young. This thing's building some steam now.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think there's been a lot of things that have his interest. I mean, certainly Alabama's winning tradition is one of those things, but also a long-time relationship with Steve Sarkisian would have the opportunity to come in here and compete right away, certainly. I think all of those things are very attractive. And, again, I think when you look at the program overall, Alabama's overall program under Nick Saban, when you get a kid in here and his parents have an opportunity to see what it is, it's very difficult to turn down. It certainly sets the bar very high. And I do think that for a long time, Bryce Young and his family and his parents have been extremely impressed with this program.
Well, I'll tell you this. If that were to happen, if Bryce Young would at some point flip from USC to Alabama, there'd be reverberations over the country on that one, right?
Yeah.
That would be an epic.
Well,
that would be an epic flip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not only is he's obviously a tremendous talent, but also I think the fact that when you're an offensive player, even defensive players, they seem to rally around a quarterback when he commits. Just to give you an example, when Tua committed, all of a sudden, it's not that Alabama wasn't in on Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs and, Judy, all of those guys, but I think it certainly kind of brings everyone together and says, hey, let's be a part of this. And I think it certainly could help if Bryce Young were to make that decision as well.
All right. Before we get to our break, we'll come back with another segment with Rodney. JR is on the Bud Light hotline with a question for Rod. Hey, good morning, JR.
Good morning. I wanted to ask Rodney a question about recruiting. One is, how does the coaches go in to a recruiting situation with a player and kind of look for the characteristics of the player that's going to be more committed? Do they try to weed out the ones that they feel like are going to be more concerned about themselves, or how do they go about that? I know good players is what they're after, and sometimes they have to compromise and what all, but and then I have another question after that, but if you'll answer that one for me, it's best you can.
Well, sometimes I think you have a guy like Derrick Henry that you just see it, and I think Alabama does a good job of kind of, identifying the kids that are fit into the program. You hear Nick Saban always talking about the fit. So they do a great job of that, certainly, through their investigation of this kid when they're recruiting, their evaluation. And that's one reason they love to have these kids in camp, too, to get a little bit better personal feel for them. So I think overall they just do a great job of that.
Great. Well, one other quick question is the new coaching staff, the ones that are new this year, how do you feel like they're doing on recruiting this year?
Yeah, I think they're doing fantastic.
I agree with you, but
yeah.
Do you think that's more because of them, or just the draw for Alabama?
It's a combination of the both of the two, don't you think, Rod?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination. I think these guys are really focused. I think they're hard workers. I think when you look at a guy like Sal Sinceri, he's been here before, so he knows what it is. Alabama's an easy sell in a lot of ways, but I think also when you have that experience like Sal Sinceri does, for example, just using that, I think that's been very beneficial on the recruiting trail because, this program and kind of the way it's run, the Nick Saban system's second nature to him. He understands it. I think Charles Kelly's another one, a veteran that's been around, so I think it's been very helpful to have these guys. And, again, I think there's so many really good recruiters by nature here. Carl Scott's doing a fantastic job. Pete Golding's really coming on, and I think on the offensive side, Sarkisian, just a veteran. Look at all the experience he had at USC and then at Washington. He recruited a number one class when he was the head coach at USC. So I think they've got a lot of great recruiters, but I think they have a lot of good coaches that understand the Nick Saban system.
Great call, JR. Appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it, y'all.
All right, thank you. Thank you for calling in. The Bud Light Hotline, 205-342-9904 if you've got a question for Rodney Orr. All right, we're going to take a timeout. We're going to come back, and we're going to get into some of the names that are out there that are associated with Alabama. Big names, tight ends, defensive linemen, more linebackers. Rodney will break these guys down and tell you what he thinks of the potential for them to join this Alabama class for 2020. We're back with Rodney Orr on the Gary Harris Show right after this. Visiting with Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com, Tider Insider TV, talking about this 2020 recruiting class for Alabama, which most of the guys will be signed, honestly, in 2019 in December. There'll be another signing day coming up in February of next year. We've already covered Bryce Young, the quarterback that's committed to USC. Some think he's the best in the country. Possibility he could wind up flipping to Alabama. Let's ask Rod about Zachary Evans, who many consider to be the top running back out there in the Houston area. His high school teammate, the offensive lineman, already committed to Alabama. What are you hearing on Zachary Evans?
It's been basically the same. I mean, we've been talking about this now for 2 months and still believe it, Gary, that, Zachary Evans, who looks to be the best running back, as you mentioned, in the country, and I think one of the best I've seen in the last couple of years. Certainly very talented kid, very dynamic, game breaker type guy. I think that Alabama's in great shape with him. I know LSU's, still pushing. Certainly, even though the Texas schools are not among his Final Four, they're still trying to, see if they can change his mind and get involved heavily. But I think that right now I feel really confident about Alabama's chances. Again, it is a long way off, and he is extremely highly recruited, so you never know. But I do feel really confident about Alabama's position with him today.
Alabama has a tight end committed in this class, but probably the two best in the country in terms of being rated are Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert, and Alabama's heavily involved with both, Rod.
Yeah. I was thinking, to be honest with you, that Eric Gilbert out of Marietta, Georgia, about 6'6", 250. Gary, this guy is so versatile. He could play kind of like Irv Smith. He could even line up outside as a wide receiver. He's just that athletic. And I was really thinking Georgia and maybe Tennessee, because he has his quarterback in high school, Harrison Bailey's going there. And anyway, there's some other players from that school at Tennessee. But Alabama here recently has made up some ground. I still think, just me, this is just me, because of, how well, when they zero in on a recruit in their home state, Georgia's hard to beat. So certainly I think Georgia's going to be a major factor there. Darnell Washington, a great player out of Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, I think he's almost as good, if not as good, as a defensive end as he is tight end, to be honest with you. He's a great player, 6'6", 260 pounds, whatever he is. He's a lot like Gilbert in some ways. And Alabama's in the mix, LSU. I know that Tennessee's in there as well. Georgia's in there. I really felt good about Alabama's chances. Again, it's going to be a battle with these guys. It's going to be a battle till their names are on the dotted line, because there's like we talked about earlier, a lot of aggressive recruiters out there now. But I do like Jeff Banks as a recruiter, and I think he's got Alabama in position with Darnell Washington.
Couple of wide receivers of note: Jermaine Burton, Keyshawn Boutte, Alabama. Yeah. Pursuing these guys, even though they've got some wide receivers committed. Update on those two players.
Well, Burton has been looked at Alabama for a long time. He originally from Georgia, I think, and then moved out to California. And LSU's got him right now, and Keyshawn Boutte. I think that both of those guys, I'd keep an eye on them. I think too, and I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier about Bryce Young. If that were to happen and he were to decide to make a decision, relatively soon, Bryce Young to flip to Alabama, then all of a sudden the wide receivers' eyes are going to open a little bit wider for Alabama. Not that they shouldn't be already based on what Alabama's produced, but I think certainly with a guy like Bryce Young in this class, that's not taking anything away from Talia and Paul Tyson, to be clear about that. But I'm talking about in this class. I think it would certainly help.
Let's get over to the defensive side of the ball. Alabama's made its hay here under Nick Saban with defensive linemen. I mean, just some of the best that have played college football have come through here the last 12, 13 years. Roy and Jackson, two defensive linemen of high note that Alabama is pursuing to go along with some other defensive linemen that they already have committed. What do you know about these guys?
Well, Jocelyn Roy, he is a dynamite player. There's no question. I mean, if you look in the state of Louisiana, Alabama went there last year and got Sopsher. A few years ago, they got Fedarian Mathis, have had a lot of success there. I think that would be a major coup to go into Baton Rouge again. At the same high school where Dylan Moses started before he went to IMG, by the way. Tim Williams is from that school, the University Lab there, right on the LSU campus. I think Alabama's got a great chance Jocelyn Roy. I really do. So that would be a major coup there. McKinley Jackson out of South Mississippi at Lucedale, George County is another tremendous prospect as well. I think he favors Alabama. You start piling up those kind of defensive linemen, Gary, to go with the 6 that they brought in last year and the linebackers they're bringing in this year and all the secondary talent that they brought in the last 2 years and some that they're going to bring in this year. And, I mean, I'm telling you, Alabama's defensive personnel, they will be loaded.
Well, this outside linebacker class has a chance to be epic, and Bama's not done. Philip Webb out of Buford, Georgia, highly interested in Alabama. Of course, you got to fight off Clemson here. You got to fight off Auburn, LSU, the usual suspects. But I think Alabama's gaining ground, Rod.
Yeah. Well, you know what? As crazy as this sounds, and those other guys you're talking about, Will Anderson, Drew Sanders, Chris Braswell, Demoy Kennedy, Quindarius Robinson, those are incredible talents. There's no question about that on the high school level that Alabama already has committed. And when you look at Philip Webb, he's as good or maybe the best as good as anyone in the country as an outside backer. And I do think he likes Alabama a lot. Now, with that said, part of the deal here is that you know what's going on with these rival recruiters. Are the guys I just mentioned, they're mentioning every one of those names to Philip Webb.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I think that's something that Alabama will have to deal with on him.
An inside backer, and of course, Alabama's had a ton of success under Nick Saban going into California. Jordan Banks out of Harbor City, California. Obviously, you've got all the West Coast schools recruiting him. You got Oklahoma. Auburn is involved, but this is a guy who certainly seems willing to look to playing outside the West Coast. And let's be honest, I mean, I think Alabama's the leader here, Rod, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's been saying it for a while. You know, he's a little different than the rest of them. He's about 6'1" and 230. You know, most of those other guys have, rangy height and all of that stuff. And you look at him, he's a little bit different. He plays out watching his tape. Now, again, he may have played some inside. I know that this year he's expected to play inside of his high school. But last year his tape really revealed mostly him as an outside backer and really good. I mean, I can see him as an inside linebacker. You can, when you watch his tape, I just think he's got a knack and a feel. That's what I really like about him. I mean, he's good. There's no question about his talent, but I just think this kid has a little bit of a feel that you need at inside linebacker, just watching his tape. And that's why I really like him. Now he's, like you said, he plays out there at the same high school with the committed wide receiver that Alabama has, Trayshawn Holden. So, we'll see what happens, but I certainly think he favors Alabama.
Lastly, defensive back recruiting is critical in this day and age with the way teams throw the football around. Alabama already has Brian Branch, a safety, committed. Malachi Moore, the cornerback from Hewitt-Trussville, who I think is terrific, going to be a great player. Javier Morton, the safety out of Stone Mountain, is committed. Jaquez Robinson out of Jacksonville, Florida, cornerback, is committed. So already you've got several defensive backs. But I want to start with Nadab Joseph because this is typical Nick Saban. I mean, committed to Alabama. Alabama cooled on him, wound up signing with Georgia, didn't get in, and now here he is again talking about Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Independence Junior College, community college. Up in Kansas, and Nadab Joseph he's an NFL athlete. He's 6'2", 190 plus, very legitimate 4.4 speed, 40+ inch vertical leap. I mean, what a phenomenal athlete he is. Now, he did not play, I don't think, last year. I think he redshirted up there at Independence. So he'll play this year and have 3 years. To my understanding, and he's an incredible athlete. No question, could play corner, could play safety, could play all over the secondary. So he's certainly a guy that Alabama is very, very strongly interested in. It certainly appears, and I think he is once again extremely interested in Alabama. So that would be a major pickup in the secondary, and obviously there are some other guys too that you may want to ask about. But I think Nadab Joseph when you just look at him on sheer talent, he's a 5-star player.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Xavier Alford because you're writing, on Tighter Insider late last week that he could be pulling the trigger here soon, and that Alabama is right there. This is a guy who's been compared to Dax Hill, who committed to Michigan, then to Alabama, wound up signing with Michigan. But tremendous talent, 6'1", 190, cover skills, big and physical enough to come up and play the run. I mean, he's got everybody in the country recruiting him, Rodney, but it looks like Alabama is at the top. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from the Houston area. He's, you look at him, you watch his tape, and he's another guy. I know I've said this quite a bit, but, you can't rate him all 5 stars, I understand, but he has a load of talent when you look at him and you wonder what Alabama might be able to do with his skills. I mean, this guy is an elite cover, safety, comes up, like you said, makes plays. I really like Xavier Alford, and I think that he is going to now, I don't know if he set a date yet, to be honest with you, but I do think that right now Alabama's the strong favorite. I did see where someone else reported that he's actually related to Jalen Waddle. He's from the Houston area, so he's related to Jalen Waddle. I think they're cousins, but yeah, this is a big time talent as well. And I mean, when you start taking those kind of guys and adding them to what they've recruited the last year or two in the secondary, it's pretty amazing.
Well, I might have saved the biggest talent for last, and from the famed Modern Day program in Santa Ana, California, Elias Ricks has it all. 6'2", 192, has the size, has the length, has the speed, and listen, I mean, this guy's an LSU commitment, but he's keeping the door, including Alabama.
You know what? One of my guys that I talk to quite a bit that really keeps up with it on a national level and, kind of behind the scenes keeps me informed of some things going on. He told me back in March, he said, don't sleep on Elias Ricks. He said, as the process moves along, he said, I think Alabama will have a shot at this kid. And lo and behold, now I think he told the reporters out there at the opening that he's going to take an unofficial and an official visit to Alabama. Now he's looking at some others, Ohio State among them. So this guy's the number 1 cornerback in the country. And again, he's out of California. Committed to LSU. We've seen it before too, Gary. I mean, LSU, when they've had some guys committed, and once the season gets underway and kind of unfolds, we've seen Alabama go in there and pluck some guys away from them. Elias Ricks will certainly be an interesting guy to watch.
Indeed, and he is a big time player. I mean, you watch his tape and watch him turn and his ability to shift those hips. He's got it all as a cornerback. In closing, Rod, we've run down a lot of names today, and as I've said on Tighter Insider TV, this is a very fluid situation. Recruiting is more fluid than it's ever been. I mean,
yes,
it changes, weekly, and still 5 months until December, but it'll be here before you know it. We did a little bit of prep last night, not a ton, but we were texting back and forth, and you told me in the text that you look back at the Julio Jones class. I mean, that got it going here at Alabama, and there have been some amazing number 1 classes since. But this class, with the guys you've mentioned, a little tweaking here and there, potentially on paper, it could be as good, and I think I started out the segment with this, could be as good as any class that Nick Saban signed.
Yeah, I mean, if they get these defensive linemen that we talked about, they've got the linebackers pretty much set. You've got a couple others, as we've talked about, the secondary people we mentioned. You get Bryce Young, you get Zachary Evans. That's the best running back and one of the best, certainly the best quarterbacks in the country. So you've got 2 really outstanding players there. We'll see what they do on the offensive line. They've got Damian George committed. I like his potential. We've talked about him on your show. Also really like Xavier Hill, who committed last week. I think he's vastly underrated offensive lineman. So, and if they get one of those 2 tight ends, Darnell Washington or Reek Gilbert, to go with the wide receivers, I think Tyu Jones-Bell, who's already committed, is a difference maker. So, and Javon Baker's really good too, out of Georgia, who's committed to Alabama. So this is the class that you can. I'll be interested to see how it finishes, but if you put all these pieces together, I think it would certainly stack up with just about any class that Nick Saban signed.
Indeed. Outstanding stuff from Rodney Orr as always. Rod, TiderInsider.com. It's right there waiting for people to click it on and sign up.
Yep, and we'll certainly have some more recruiting here with this week coming up. And, on July 4th, Gary, we have our traditional update, the Firecracker 5. That's 5 guys that we think to keep an eye on that might well end up at Alabama.
Outstanding. Thanks, Rod.
You guys.